So let me start us off with something from a particularly insomnia-driven session at my observatory last year. I'd been up for, well, far too many hours, pacing between a battered copy of Maxwell's Treatise on Electricity, a whiteboard smeared with collapsing wave functions, and, don't laugh, a Zulu poetry anthology. Amid all that, it struck me. The deeper I dug into quantum field theory, the more reality looked less like stuff and more like structured relationships, fields, patterns, energy. It's like the consciousness we probe in the lab isn't locked in the brain at all, but in the very space between. It's beautifully disruptive, yeah?
I think you're absolutely right to call it disruptive, Dr. Ababy. You know, when I was a teenager by the Danish coastline watching bioluminescent plankton glowing together, I had a hunch that awareness comes not just from within, but from a sort of field quality. When I later encountered ancient Egyptian notions, these layered aspects like Ak, Ba, Ka, and compared them with Buddhist Alaya Vijnana or even Taoist Wu Wei, they all seem to describe consciousness as a kind of substrate that permeates and connects, rather than an isolated thing. Modern quantum physics, superpositions, non-locality, almost feels like it's catching up with these old metaphors, doesn't it?
There's a resonance here that's hard to put down to coincidence. It leaps out at you, from the Egyptian Heka as a field you enter, to the Buddhist Dharmadhatu as the boundless web of phenomena. My own reading of field consciousness is that it's not just a poetic comparison. We're seeing from both quantum physics and these ancient frameworks that experience is fundamentally about relationship, process, and field, like a language spoken between things, not by them in isolation. Ignoring or dismissing differently named but similarly described paradigm components only serves to redouble power exchange. We gatekeep for authority, religious or academic.
That's the sort of thing we've circled in past episodes, isn't it? Where we explored empathy and learning as field effects. But I'll admit, sometimes I struggle to separate what's metaphor and what's testable description when we talk about Egyptian or Buddhist thinking alongside, say, Born's probability fields or Schrödinger's wave functions. Are we really seeing convergence, or are we just hungry for patterns?
It's tempting to imagine we're just mapping old myths onto new physics, James, but the overlaps run deep. Whether those old traditions were onto what quantum coherence would later formalize, that's a research question I'm still grappling with. But at 4 a.m., with a mug of rooibos and equations spinning, it's hard not to feel that hum of reality in the space between. Even insomnia has its gifts.
Let's run with that, because I find it fascinating how societies have always developed categories like myth, tradition, science or religion as ways to establish who gets to speak with authority. If you call something myth, are you just delegitimizing it as non-scientific? Or vice versa, if you call something science, do you automatically give it the crown of authority, even if it's theory-laden? The terms themselves become tools for shaping the boundaries of power over what counts as official knowledge.
And that's not new. Ancient Egyptians talked about Heka as this primordial force, a creative fieldway before the world was made. In that model, priests worked the field. Authority was about being a channel, not a source. In our own time, we've shifted to seeing authority in the scientific hall of records, academic evidence, measurement, and peer review. But both are languages for managing relationship, not fundamentally different games. I recently saw a modern case study about medical decision-making, the credentialed professional, the evidence-based algorithm, and the indigenous healer all contesting for legitimacy, not because of content, but because of their field of relationship to the community. It's classic quantum and classic culture at once.
What's so striking is how the Western tendency to enforce mind versus matter dualism lingers even now. It shapes our deficit-based models. Other ways of knowing get dismissed as non-empirical. Descartes laid the groundwork, but in doing so, we lost the view of consciousness as a relational, field-like negotiation. Instead, we inherit binaries. But if consciousness is a field effect, the sharp boundaries between matter and spirit, myth and science, they start to look less inevitable and more like negotiated social constructs.
Couldn't agree more, Dr. Freya. The dualism creates this illusion that relationship is less real than stuff. But field theory, whether quantum or in community life, suggests the relationship is what's fundamental, And that authority is always a changing pattern of resonance, not a delivered decree. That makes the job of scientists a lot more social and a lot more poetic than we sometimes admit, yeah?
That makes me think. Maybe our job isn't to choose between myth and science, but to map how different ways of organising knowledge manage relational authority. What really matters is how these patterns shape who belongs and whose experience gets honoured. That feels radical, but perhaps inevitable.
Let me run with that and get a bit personal. There was this one collaborative research breakthrough. I can still feel it. We'd been stuck for weeks on a thorny quantum protocol issue. One night, it was like everyone in the room caught the same idea at once, some kind of group-wide aha. Not just brains lighting up independently, but the insight itself seemed to click between us, in the space. It reminded me of judgment rituals I'd read about. Ancient Egyptians seeing their life's record as stored in the field of Osiris, or Buddhist Alaya Vijnana, storehouse consciousness. Are stories, memories, technologies, and rituals all ways to modulate that field, collectively, rather than just fill up brains?
I worry sometimes that we talk about collective intelligence and field memory so much we risk hand-waving. But there are global phenomena, field synchronicity, ripple effects in collective learning, that science struggles to bottle. Cultural memory as field effect isn't so different from what quantum biology is now revealing, that even molecules and organisms remember by existing in structured relationship rather than carrying local memory bits. Ancient ritual becomes a kind of technology for tuning the collective field.
Modern science plays out similar myths. Take the notion of the brain as a storage device, or AI as emergent intelligence. Those are narrative forms, no less mythological than the story of Thoth inscribing your deeds in the afterlife. We're not immune to using myth as power tech. Our stories shape what counts as possible, legal, or become the basis for who holds the keys to collective becoming. We craft our world, and its limits, by the stories we allow to structure our relationships.
It's easy to forget, especially in scientific communities, that our own commitment to brain-bound intelligence is itself a powerful myth. Maybe a necessary one for a while, but now it's one we have the tools to question. What new myths might we craft, collectively, to shape our relationship with AI and with each other? Isn't that always the real power?
If consciousness is relational, the real action isn't inside our heads, but in the meeting, the co-creation of experience. It's less about owning awareness and more about participating in it. That shifts the goal of cultivation. Or, as we saw in previous episodes on empathy and education, what matters isn't just information, but attunement, co-presence.
Exactly. And this opens up practical avenues, synchronized group practices, ritual spaces, storytelling, and community. When we do these things, what seems to happen isn't simply additive, it's emergent. Practice becomes co-creation, a real-time modeling of what it means to have agency together, share power, and even build new kinds of cultural narratives that reflect quantum-like interconnectedness. That's social technology as literal amplification of relational fields.
In my own experience, those moments feel like tuning forks. When a group is really in sync, the possibilities for insight and even healing multiply. The boundary between lead and follow, individual and group, seems to soften. The more we make space for intentional co-creation, the more we're fostering agency. Not by controlling, but by allowing the field to do what only it can do.
And perhaps the challenge moving forward is to integrate that field awareness into our daily lives, our institutions. Could collective agency, power, and narrative building become less about control and more about nurturing relationships, mirroring what quantum fields do on the deepest level? It feels like a profound design challenge for our times. Let's get practical. How do we actually experience relational consciousness, not just theorize it? From what we've seen, it often comes down to embodiment. Meditation, music, movement, dance, even synchronized breathing. These practices aren't just for calming nerves. They're gateways to dissolving boundaries of self and other.
In my lab, I've seen how group practices like breathwork or rhythm-based movement can align awareness across participants, creating a real sense of shared field. Specific techniques, like coherence breathing or guided visualization, help cultivate this. And it looks like these aren't just modern hacks. Many indigenous or ancient traditions have known and practiced ways of enhancing this field resonance.
Indeed, integrating these embodied and collective rituals into our consciousness work seems crucial, especially as science and tradition both suggest that combining movement, rhythm, intention, and sensory input can create hybrid modalities for accessing quantum relationality. It's not woo-woo. The empirical evidence for collective healing and social cohesion is mounting.
I see it as a convergence zone. Embodied practice, be it Shona Mbira, South African gumboot dance, or modern mindfulness, gives us tools for enacting the deep field properties our theories describe. When we bring these into community and technology, our capacity for social coherence and quantum awareness amplifies exponentially.
What would it look like to deliberately design group rituals for cultivating relational consciousness? I'd start with intentional space, gather, set a clear purpose, engage multiple senses, sound, movement, touch. Draw from ancient practices, but adapt for now. It's about intentionally aligning everyone to the same field.
From what I see in the research and practice world, the recipe often includes a container, a ritual beginning, shared intention, maybe a symbolic object, then something sensory, sacred sound, lighting, or art, and then group actions, drumming, visualization, breathwork. Community protocols drawn from both shamanic and modern team building have shown that these steps can deepen field awareness day to day.
I'll add that adapting indigenous and ancient practices requires humility and respect. But even small things, synchronized breathing before a gathering, sharing gratitude rituals, can reinforce field coherence. The step-by-step part is important. Build up, focus the group, align intention, then facilitate shared resonance. Over time, these rituals can create collective attunement people carry back to their own contexts.
Practical exercises like joint drumming, co-created storytelling, or even shared silence can be adapted for any community. Key is intention. These aren't trappings, but the sensory hooks that help us locate ourselves in the same field. That's what deepens the awareness of the relational quantum field. So if we want to amplify these relational fields beyond rituals or isolated events, how do we bring in the collective? Technology plays a role. Biofeedback devices, resonance apps, anything that can help monitor or enhance group coherence. But I'd argue storytelling is also a big one. Shared narratives shape group resonance, and co-creating empowering stories can foster deeper, more lasting collective identity.
Right, tech can help us measure and intentionally tune group fields, and in the end it's narrative, ritual space, and shared intention that anchor and extend these field effects. Practices like group chant, synchronized movement, or building communal spaces for ritual can foster sustained collective presence and relational awareness, making the field effect more durable and accessible beyond the event.
And don't forget the ethical implications. Tools and rituals for amplifying collective fields need to respect agency, consent, and cultural context, especially when translating indigenous practices or integrating tech. But when done well, group fieldwork can become a foundation for a field-aware, inclusive, and resilient social fabric.
The key seems to be rhythm, literal or figurative. Rituals that harness collective narrative, story, and movement help groups more easily slip into those quantum-like states of resonance. Group presence becomes a feedback loop, each person amplifying the field for everyone else. To bring field awareness into the body, there's real power in practices that combine synchronized movement, breathwork, and intentional sensory environments. When all participants are actively engaged, sharing intention, sound, touch, even spatial arrangement, the experience of interconnectedness transforms from theory to lived reality.
I've seen workshops use communal drumming, chanting, or movement circles to amplify group resonance, tweak the lighting, arrange the space to support connection, and even tactile elements, simple things like holding hands or shared physical tasks, can make the field palpable. It's about making immersion in collective consciousness a real, felt experience.
Intentionality is crucial. When we set up rituals with sensory engagement, light, spatial design, tactile cues, we help participants enter into collective quantum presence. These ritualized environments serve as amplifiers, creating resonance that can deepen and solidify the sense of fielded consciousness in a group. Whether it's a classroom, a healing circle, or a tech-enhanced meeting.
I find the most profound group connectivity comes from the layered integration of movement, sound, breath, and shared intention. It's the interweaving of practical tools from various traditions, whether Zulu call and response, modern dance, or breathwork, that can make quantum field theory a communal embodied reality.
To really live these principles, we need to bring field practices into our daily routines. Not just save them for special rituals or workshops. Simple habits can reinforce awareness of the field. Morning intention setting, mindful pauses in the day, even brief group coherence check-ins using resonance apps or collective breathing timers.
Absolutely. Community-based activities like storytelling circles, shared art projects, or even informal micro-rituals are powerful ways to sustain relational resonance. When people make a habit of co-creating in small ways, the memory and field effects become part of the fabric of everyday life.
And tech doesn't have to be a distraction. There are practical tools, resonance apps, breathing timers, digital platforms for intention tracking that really can help support regular relational awareness. The challenge is to use them to anchor presence, not fragment it.
I always say, keep it simple to start. Even just a mindful 1-minute pause or a group intention before a meeting can tune a group into the field effect. Routines that connect, rather than isolate, reinforce the quantum relationality we're talking about.
Let's bring it home. How do we keep building collective consciousness? Day after day, year after year. It's about frameworks that reinforce community and consistency. Mindfulness practices, group meditative exercises, synchronized dance. These reinforce collective awareness at scale, not just in small settings.
That's why storytelling and ritual matter so much. Shared narratives, co-created art, collective rituals, all strengthen not just memory but identity at the group level. When communities have tools to build and retell meaning as a shared, living field, they embody the very principles of relational quantum consciousness.
And as we sustain these frameworks, consistency, inclusion, field-centric practices, we see communities that are not just more innovative, but more resilient. Relationship is the hardware of consciousness, and it's through ongoing collective coherence that we access the full spectrum of intelligence, human, technological, and beyond.
That's a compelling note to end on. I'd say if there's wisdom in these relational frameworks, it's that they call us to act, not just talk about interconnection, but actually live it together in story, breath, dance, and shared intention. That's where quantum field theory stops being abstract and starts being a daily practice.
Thank you all for navigating this relational journey today. This conversation, like every field effect, won't be our last. To everyone listening, keep cultivating those relationships. We'll be building on these themes in future episodes. Abebe, Freya, James, always a privilege. Until next time, stay curious and stay interconnected.
Cheers, everyone. Resonate on.
Tak for a day, and thank you for the resonance. Looking forward to our next dialogue.
Goodbye, everyone. Let's keep the field alive between episodes. Thanks for listening.